the level of harmonisation, and so on. Are we talking about just technical aspects? Are we talking about harmonising standards and procedures? Or are we talking about managing this at European level and therefore harmonising at that level as well? I do think we need to clarify to what extent this European dimension is going to be part of this approach. I can tell you what I think. I do think we need a coordinated use. I do think we need to pool resources. It's true that the frequencies are a national competence, are national property to some extent, but I think if we all realise that the best use of these resources can be made by coordinating matters strongly, then I do think we can achieve more. So I do hope that the European Commission, supported by Council and Parliament, can come up with a proposal so that we can have a coordinated approach and coordinated use. Looking at the beneficiaries then, I do think we need to go back to what was done under the telecoms package and what has been written in relation to that by the two rapporteurs. I do think we need a similar approach. We need to make sure that this works for our companies, that services can be improved, but I do think we also need to think about our consumers. We need more services and of a higher quality. Those points have already been made. We need new services at affordable prices and also a better media and broadcasting offer. Cultural pluralism, I think, is one of our key principles as we see it in our democracies, but unfortunately that principle isn't fully applied in all of our countries. So I do think we need to stress that information pluralism, pluralism in the media is important, and that ties in with defending our cultural diversity and so on. Points, as I said, made by others. But I do think that what is on offer in the media and audiovisually needs to be broadened and disseminated more widely. And then my last point is on what I would call the weaker individuals. If you talk about access to these services, I do think you need to guarantee access to certain services so that the spectrum can be of benefit to all of us. We talk about rural broadband, but I would stress that in some countries, my country being one of them, you don't even have broadband in industrialised areas or cities in some cases. So I do think you need to look at this in terms of general access for any area which is without broadband now, and not just look at it from the point of view of rural broadband, and also look at those who might not have access because of their social position in society. And we also need to look at groups in our population who are potential users and the potential users that might be made of it by association and others. So these are the main 3 points that I wanted to make. It's not up to me to talk about technical standards and so on. As a co-legislator, I do think we need to set out a number of priorities, and I hope I've done that. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher collègue, pour votre contribution.
Thank you very much for that contribution. And now perhaps I can hand the floor to another lady, Mrs. Hella Rana, another member of the European Parliament, and then we'll hand the floor to 2 member states.
Ja, es klingt verlockend, breit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Broadband everywhere, from the highest peak to the lowest valley. It's an ambitious objective, and it's certainly a major challenge for all of us to get that done. But what do we need to take into account in order to achieve this? Because we do have very tight resources, and that means that you have to make optimal use of them. And in achieving that, you need to avoid making errors. And I do think it's quite easy to fall into some pitfalls here. The upper UHF band, should that be used for new services in addition to what it's used for now? Or should we make it free in Europe and just use it for smartphones, for example, and those services? Because if so, what are you going to do with interferences, and who's going to foot the bill for this, for the current users, cable distributors and so on, those that will be moved off those frequencies? Do we have technical solutions? Are they feasible? Have we got tried and tested technology for that? Or is that something we still need to find out about? And I just don't think we can answer that question for now, which means that we need to bear in mind what the overall objective is, and that is frequency management on an equal footing between the cultural, economic and social dimensions. Current users cannot be squeezed out of the market by new services becoming available, and terrestrial broadcasting can only be done through UHF. We know that because of the technical limitations there, but we do need to make sure that a broad program offer is offered throughout the territory and that can be guaranteed, because it leads to media pluralism, cultural diversity, and I do think it's also important for broadcasting regional programs. And I wouldn't want to take anything away from that. And of course, the switchover was financed by a number of broadcasters, and they need to be able to draw on their investments therefore. And I would also like to mention a further fact, which I don't think has been touched upon today yet, and that is reporting broadcasting. For example, broadcasting the Olympics, what can be put on show in concert halls, universities and so on. If you move frequencies and, for example, wireless microphones which are used in all of these institutions or for cultural events will no longer be used, and any alternative there is very expensive. So therefore, broadband full coverage is a major priority for our society and is a major challenge. But the capacities that we're talking about here cannot just be achieved without having in place a clear approach. And I've been told that 3,000 new base stations will be making 5 megabytes per second available everywhere, and apparently Vodafone is working on that, but that's a lot. Will that be possible? And how about electrosmog then? Isn't that something we should be careful about? Because that might be used to question new technologies. I think any use needs to be user-friendly, needs to be feasible over time, needs to be sustainable, and I think that's in the interest of all participants, member states and politicians alike, but also, of course, of interest to the consumers and the users. And I also think that the speed of transmission is very important. Member states have
Yes, because
yes.
it's difficult for the translator. Thank you.
Oui, die Medienpolitik der Mitgliedstaaten.
The media policies in member states cannot be jeopardized by this. All of the member states have very different requirements and conditions, and you do need to look for a common denominator there. And I think that the Commission, the Council, but we also here in Parliament, and the stakeholders have a major role to play and a major challenge to tackle. We need to manage harmonisation at European level, whilst at the same time giving member states the freedom to develop their own media policy and implement their own media policy. There are competing interests to some extent there, and it will be difficult to try and reconcile those. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but if we can achieve optimal use whilst offering new services